Hey everyone, JB here. A very special place. I'm here at the Justice Brothers location, just outside of, well, it is still Los Angeles, really, with my great friend, Ed Justice. And Ed, I'll explain how this came around. Obviously, this past weekend was a tremendously sad one for the racing community when Dan Gurney passed away and left us. And he left such an enormous hole that I think there's people all over the world that are reaching out saying, oh, do you remember when he said that to me? Do you remember when he did this? And do you remember that story? And for me, as a modern generation racing driver with a definite link and a tie to the past, I actually, I really wanted to connect with you because I know you knew Dan so well, and we spent a lot of time together, and we're always talking about racing now and racing then.
Right.
And, this is definitely two guys sharing stories, mainly me listening to you.
Yeah. About somebody we really greatly respect.
Yeah.
And respected.
Respected.
Yeah,
and
right.
Isn't that the whole thing around the world? Because what a man.
Who truly earned our respect too.
Okay. Yeah. Truly earned it.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't necessarily give him this respect. He really deserved the respect. I mean, that's why he is so his passing has had such an amazing impact, really.
Yeah.
And it's not like, look at a lot of people when they pass, people always say great things about them, even if they're a no good scoundrel, because
exactly.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's not the case here. I mean, This is was a good man, a great man, an amazing piece of auto racing history. I mean, really, truly, there's only one Dan Gurney, and there will only be one Dan Gurney. And I think that's what we're going to celebrate here. Well,
we were just talking while I was setting up. And, thank you very much, Tom, for saying that. And that's really the whole point is we are sharing because I'm in the company of someone that knew him well and has a lot of history. But really, I had this urge to follow up on what you said, which is a lot of people in life, they want us to tell them how great they are. We create these amazing stories of how great they are, and they in fact get better as they get older, like we have. But with Dan, it truly wasn't the case. I sometimes find it a pity in life that we only really start doing a lot of research, reading a lot of books when someone passes away, and you suddenly go, oh my goodness, I had no clue that this is it. But with Dan Gurney, it was a pretty well-publicized trail. But
even so, though, I think a lot of people had forgotten a lot of what he had done, because when you do as much as Dan did, I think people forgot that he won the first F1 race for Brabham.
Yeah.
Okay, for Jack. He won the first F1 race for Bruce McLaren at McLaren. I mean, think
That's
about
a lot,
this.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, think about the names that we're talking about. And I think, look, one thing I want to make sure that's clear, I don't speak for Dan Gurney. No. One thing I witnessed is a lot of people spoke for Dan Gurney, and most of the time they were really wrong.
Yes.
Okay, they would quote him in wrong ways or whatever, and so that's not my role. Look at Dan Gurney spoke for himself, and there's plenty been documented if you look at the right places. Okay, and not all of them are right. Okay, but. He won the first and only F1 race for Porsche.
Amazing. I mean, the one and only.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's a swath of history just in those three victories there.
Yeah. I mean, the rest of us cling on to like one or two cool things in our life, but he had a lot. But it's quite fitting that we're sitting where we are. We're just the other side of Pasadena, and it's a stone's throw from central LA. But Dan came from the East Coast. He arrived here as a young man, and immediately was enamored, with the hot rod scene, with the car culture of America.
In effect, he said it was probably the worst thing his parents could have done was put him right in the center.
Right in the middle.
It was in effect like he had just landed in the absolute dream land. I mean, what else could the California hot rodding, The weather, I mean, it was the worst case scenario if they wanted to try and keep him away from auto racing.
He didn't know he was probably, he was about to be a lifelong addict of this passion and hobby and sport, but he came from very intelligent bloodstock, didn't he? I mean, they went to Harvard and people invented things.
Yeah, intelligent is for sure one word. Innovative, the Gurney ball bearing.
Yeah, that's what I was reading.
I mean, a lot of this has been written in a book that they put together that will be coming out. And I mean, a lot of that was never really known as much by people during his career, I don't think. And today, a lot of people. His dad was a singer for the Metropolitan Opera, and I mean, his
not
dad,
the back guy, not like me at the church choir.
His dad was the real deal.
Wow.
I mean, I've seen images of a program, John Gurney. I mean, there he is, and it's sponsored by Ford, which is a rather 6 degrees of separation because of Dan's history with Ford. It's just amazing. I mean, really, he did come from really, really strong East Coast bloodstock. And Evie, his wife, told my wife and I one time that there was no way that this family could have kept him from auto racing.
In one way or another, it would have been his route.
Right. Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely.
So tell me, when he used to talk to you about, did he ever talk about the early days? Because Riverside, which I'm not very good on my geography, Riverside, which no longer exists, by the way, is it a housing development, I think? But
a mall.
A mall.
Yeah, very bad mall.
One of the most formative racetracks for so many careers, and whether you're an engineer or car builder or driver, Riverside right here, I mean, as you say, he's in the right place. What were those days like for him?
Well, first of all, I mean, he met a young friend, Skip Hudson, who was also a racer, and they were lifelong friends until Skip's passing a few years back. And they would run around in the Porsche Speedster. I mean, there's this great shot of Dan coming over a hill with the car in flight 10 years before he did that at the Nürburgring in his Eagle.
Wow.
Which is an amazing transition.
Yes.
And Skip shot that picture. Skip, I give him credit as a motorsports photographer. It's an amazing image. What a great image to have.
Yeah.
And they literally ran around the area where Riverside ended up being built, because that's where his family had relocated to they were, I guess, somehow in the citrus business, you know what I mean? And I mean, it's just amazing. They called Riverside the House of Gurney. That was a nickname for it.
Well, he had one of his most formative races, right? When he, I was going to say, Dan also was making his mark on racing in sports cars and formula cars when there were already a plethora of rock star drivers in the fields, right? I mean, it wasn't. There are some drivers that come through when there's a little hole in the history of great drivers. I mean, that big win he had against Bobby Unser. I mean, he's overtaken Bobby Unser. That's not a bad way to make your mark.
Yeah, well, he had. You know what? Dan had a lot of big wins. I mean, when it came to stock cars, he won 5 out of the 6 races, if I remember right, and a lot of them with the Wood brothers.
Yes,
who he had the greatest respect for. And in typical Dan fashion, he said, when I drove for those guys, it was almost like cheating. And
they were so good at what
they were so
did.
good. Yeah. And I mean, that's Dan. I mean, he's, but obviously you can't discount the fact that he was just like having a cigarette. No.
He was
talk to the rest of the guys on the track. Okay. And, I mean, I've been told by a notable driver that he said Dan Gurney was the smoothest race car driver I've ever witnessed in my life. I mean, I think Dan just had an innate ability and you know, I mean, it was just rather amazing. And considering that Dan came along in a time when drivers didn't go to driving school, they didn't start at 5 years old in a go-kart. No. You know what I mean?
You evolved into it.
Yeah.
But also,
I mean, it was a different era. And did he talk about the past? He would if it was brought up.
Okay.
But I think it's clear if you look at his career, Dan was always looking towards the future. I mean, you know, they were developing this motorcycle engine that they got patented, and it's not far off from being run, unfortunately. I mean, this is a very sad thing, I know, for the family, and I know I feel very sad that he never got to hear it run. But you know, I mean, he was involved in, they built the Delta Wing at All American Racers.
Technology was such a part of what he did that definitely having the intellect he was such a, I mean, we've had some people here say, obviously, you know, the Gurney, I mean, we love the fact he invented the champagne spray for people that are not intellectual drivers like myself.
Right.
If you make it to the podium, Dan did a lot for the rest of us. But the Gurney flap, just things like that. I mean, just one of
here's what Bobby Unser had to say, and this was quoted in an article. Bobby, who was the driver when the Gurney flap was introduced for Dan.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And they went to Phoenix, and they said, "Hey, we want you to try this." And he came back in, and he goes, "Whatever it is," and there are other people testing. You know, you want to keep it secret type.
Whatever
of thing.
It is, just
He said. This is quoting Bobby Unser. The Gurney flap is the biggest innovation in racing. It outdid the ground effects, in my opinion. I was the most surprised guy on earth that tested something that looked so stupid that was so important and still is today. Everything that has to do with aerodynamics has a Gurney flap on it somewhere. Wow. And, you know, this was in the car. Then, you know, Dan's favorite Indy car that he built was the 1981 Eagle. Yeah. Otherwise known by a lot of people as the Pepsi Challenger.
Yes.
Okay. Which was a bold car for a driver. If you look at it, very little protection. Okay. I mean, and the 81 Eagle, one day I was at lunch and I said, you know, the 81 Eagle reminds me a lot of the Delta Wing. They were working on the Delta Wing project at that time. And Dad said, well, the undertray on the Delta Wing came off of the plans of the 81 Eagle. Okay. Yeah. That technology was worked into the Delta Wing, a car just from a year or two ago. Yeah. And we're talking about 81 Indy car. Okay.
So ahead of it.
And I always said, I love the 81 Eagle. I do love the 81 Eagle. But I thought the most significant Gurney Eagle was the 72 Eagle. And the reason why, what brought me to this was this Gurney flap deal. The 72 Eagle is one of those rare race cars in the history of racing that was so strong and had such an impact, you almost had to own one in order to be competitive. Okay. The Type 35 Bugatti was that way in the late 20s in Grand Prix racing. Yeah. They sold those things like Model T Fords, okay? The Curtis Roadster was that way in the 50s at Indianapolis, okay? Yeah. The 72 Eagle, I think it was something like 20 of the 33 cars at one time in Indy were basic 72 Eagle derivatives.
Crazy.
Built
so dominating the grid.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that car, when they went to Indy with that 72 Eagle, they raised the qualifying speed by something like 15 miles an hour over the last year. I mean, it was 15, massive. 17 miles. Right. I mean,
You've been involved in India a long time, though.
But I mean, that's a massive jump. Yeah. It's almost like a jump so big that you go, maybe we shouldn't jump that far because we're going to get smacked.
But down. when 3/4 of the grid on your car, it's an equal jump.
Yeah, and that would come later because of that. Yeah. But that car had the Gurney flap on it. Okay,
so just little thing. But so obviously the technology, the love of racing, but someone just brought up here, Norm Hill just said here right now, you know, Dan was an honest driver. That's what comes through. It's his relationship with
a clean driver. And a clean driver.
So some people are almost
the art of driving.
Yeah, the art of driving. Some people in racing are almost bipolar. It's a bit like me. I wouldn't harm a fly in real life, but the steering wheel between my hands, I'm a little more sporty.
The red mist.
But Dan was very consistent. Tell us, I'm sure a lot of people watching this, his relationship with people was one of the most outstanding qualities of his career.
You know,
life.
There's a saying that says, don't meet your heroes, because if you do, you'll be let down.
Yeah.
That's not always true. And I have experienced that, but Dan Gurney was one that it wasn't true for. I mean, I'll give you an example to use this photo. Okay. This is a photo that was shot in 1970. I shot this photo at the California Speedway in Ontario, California. This would be Dan's last IndyCar race. Wow. I was 15 when I shot that picture. Okay. Now imagine a 15-year-old kid who had grown up in the shadow of Dan Gurney.
Yeah.
I mean, this is his last IndyCar race. He's a true legend. He had been on multiple magazine covers, Car and Driver. He had run for president already. You know what I mean? The whole 9 yards. And I walk up, and I was freelancing for the magazines at 15. And I say, "Hey, Mr. Gurney, would you mind squatting down next to the car and waving and no problem."
He did it. Well, I'm going to try that with Fernando Alonso next week at Daytona. I'll see how I get on.
No problem. It was a different time, but that's the type of guy he was. And, you know, I told him a few years ago, I said, you know, Dan, I want you to know what that meant to me.
Wow. Yeah.
That you treated me that way. I said, you know, I've carried that with me my whole life.
And I can't believe you still have that picture. Can you imagine if you'd lost that film that day?
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine those?
No. But I didn't, and I got it, and you know, I mean, and it meant, and you know, to him it was like, hey, no big deal. He wouldn't consider being other than that.
That's his way of being.
Yeah, it's
incredible.
You know, and I mean, you know, Dan had a zest for life. And I think that's the best way to put it. He loved meeting interesting people. Through him, I met a lot of interesting
He was
people.
very generous with his time.
Yes. I mean,
but I always have to say though, is we were at the opening or the Peterson Gala barely 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I was sitting at the table with Alex and Justin, his sons, and Dan and Evie were just on the next table. And quite rightly, the audience were you know, gave him a standing ovation, and it was very important. And but when I went and talked to him, I could tell it's the same as when I posted those photographs over the week of when we were at Bruce Meyer's place, and there's from that evening. I've always felt this when I'm in the company of really smart people that are successful. Yeah. Their eyes are probing you. They were very kind eyes, but he knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly what you were talking about. We were talking actually about the different classes in IMSA at one point, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I do the TV for this, but he knows more than I do.
Dan was a pure racer, and what I mean by that is he was a racer, period.
Yeah.
Pure. Loved it, loved everything about racing. He loved the innovation. He loved a good challenge. He loved a good problem. I mean, today at All American Racers in Santa Ana, when I was just down there, just literally a little over a week ago, and had lunch with Dan. And prior to that, just a few weeks before, we all got together with Parnelli and Tom Madigan. We all and that
what a group.
That was this day. This was a picture that Kathy Wida, his longtime assistant, who had been there since she was a teenager, and it still is, shot of all of us. And I said, you know, there's nothing you guys can't fabricate here. To me, All American Racers, if you had to use one word to describe what that company means, it's fabrication.
Yeah.
You give them a problem, they can do it.
Well, they're doing the legs on the SpaceX.
Sure.
The landing legs.
Sure.
So talking about Vicky, who's a huge fan of sports cars, just said, I feel the same way about a lot of drivers today, who are incredibly polite and respectful to me. I'm glad about that, Vicky. Because,
hello, Vicky.
Because that's important. But I'm going to bring in now a man who let's just say the fans they've loved him for so many reasons, especially when when he had a helmet on. Basically, that was the way I used to like Tommy Kendall. But
they said he was one of the best looking guys in racing when he had his helmet on.
Oh, they did? Oh, well, let's bring him in now. I hope that we're going to bring Tommy across right now. Tommy, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I got to just put on my helmet. They can hear you, Tommy. I can't hear you. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
There we are. I'm just going to bring that down. Still me getting used to my technology here. 1 second. Just have a little chat for a minute. I'll be back.
I love technology, particularly when it works.
So especially when Justin Bell's doing it. That's fantastic. I'm actually going to just plug this in. I did not realize this would be the case. All right. I'm going to have to plug this in, Tommy, quickly.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
No worries.
You can tell it's a one-man band. Tommy, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
That's so good.
You
like that?
You in charge of the technical is incredible. It gives me hope that I can maybe do it.
Oh, well, do you know what? I'm actually going to bring I'm just going to turn these up so hopefully Ed can hear them. Can you hear that, Ed?
Hello. Test.
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you. I just don't want to come through the mic. Everybody, this is show number 3. By show number 33, I'll have all this bugged out.
Well, this is real TV.
This is real TV,
not reality TV, which is bogus. This is real TV.
So Tommy, I'm gonna take that name out of off the middle of your face, but I gotta say, I read you were one of the first people on Twitter that I read posted on Sunday. That's why I wanted to talk to you. You said you had tears rolling down your face as you wrote your tweet, and you know he's a tough, mean, gruff guy who's been through a lot himself. But Dan, I mean, just share your experiences of him and tell people, because for you to say that, I knew what a he must have been to you.
Well, I mean, I think it was the same with everyone. You know, he treated literally everyone the same, whether it was a president or someone that I suspect waiters at the restaurant. That's what people always say. You can tell a lot about someone. So, you know, I met Dan before I had accomplished anything, really. And he treated me the same then as he did when I was able to get up on through. And one of the little joys of being a friend of his is you get these little care packages. Actually, I got to show you. I can't see myself, but I don't know if you can see my
oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. My Gurney shirt on today. But you'd get these little packages in the mail. And I don't know if I can flip this around. So the one I got literally last week. I'm in my little man cave here with my beloved El Gallo, but here it is. A little whenever you get one of these boxes, it's crazy exciting. And this one is something I didn't know existed, but I'm going to open it up. And I thought it was a sculpture, a piece of sculpture, but what it is
that's you know what?
It's a bottle opener that is shaped like his winning. And the shark nose.
I've got one of those.
That's outrageous.
Yeah,
and it's painted.
You know,
I don't know how they made it. It's got the same exact.
No, you know what?
Sprayed.
They made that, Tommy. I talked to Justin about that. They made that on the table where a lot of the Eagles were built. Again, they can fabricate anything. And I honestly, when I got that, that's one of the nicest gifts I've ever received in my life, to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's never going to be used as a bottle opener. I think we agree on that, right?
Well, I'm torn. I want to use it once, you know, as a tribute. So I know it works if they designed it. So but you know, it's just a bunch of little things, and that was, you know, the tie that you see him wearing in a lot of his moments. I got one of those in the mail. It was a Gurney printed tie with the different cars on the front, and you know, just a little hand scribbled note from Dan, you know, after a Rolex telecast or something. Hey, love your work. You know, and to get a note like that from Dan Gurney is remarkable. So it's just, he was thoughtful. You know, he was funny, but you know, he was also, you know, tough. I think the people that work for him, you know, he was just really fair, driven. You know, just kind of the prototype man. And
amazing. So I was, you know, we've had obviously a lot of people have been putting out little mementos, like you've said about handwritten notes. Actually, on the wall behind us here, I mean, Ed's got a lot of things over the years from Dan, but hand signed pictures. I mean, and also members of the public. That's what's amazing. This chap Julius just said he sat next to Dan for 4 hours on a flight, best 4 hours of his life, talking about racing. And I've sat next to mediocre rock stars and actors on long haul flights, and they haven't looked you in the eye. That was because Dan understood what motorsports and cars and our world was all about. Wouldn't you say? I mean, he understood that it's all about the people as much as the technology.
Well, and it wasn't. He wasn't doing it to be a nice guy. I think he was just genuinely interested. He was curious.
Yeah. Yes.
He loved relationship, and curious. I think is probably what's behind it. He never knew where the conversation was going to go and what it was going to lead to and what he was going to learn. So it was genuine. It wasn't like, I'm a famous guy that needs to be nice to my fans. It was
right.
Kind of a genuine interest in people.
Well, that's it. I know you were on our IMSA production call when we started the show, but one thing Ed said is that a lot of people who become something in life spend their whole life having to be told how amazing they are and telling everyone all the highlights of their lives. That was not Dan Gurney. His achievement stood for himself. And you can see that by the outpouring of grief is maybe the wrong word, but it's sadness and in sort of respect and this massive hole that's I'm not sure who quite fills that.
I want to make sure I bring this up. In 2014, he was awarded the Edison Ford Award, and to me, I told him several times, for whatever that's worth, that I thought that that's the greatest tribute that he ever got. Wow. And the reason why is that award has only been given out twice, and he's the second recipient. The first time it was given out was in 1989. Now, 1989, the second one, 2014. Yeah. Okay, that in itself tells you how significant it is. Yeah. And the first guy that they gave it to was W. Edwards Deming. And he is considered, in Japan, W. Edwards Deming is a god because he was the guy that taught Japan how to instill quality in manufacturing. And so for Dan to get that award, you could not get that award as being a great driver.
Yeah.
That wasn't enough.
Okay.
That's not going to get you in the door. And to me, that award is just an amazing tribute to Dan. And I mean,
amazing.
I mean, amazing. And I mean, he won a lot of races and a lot of other things, but that's a real tribute.
Wow.
Well, that's I thought the same thing. They give out the Nobel and the Pulitzer and all these awards, which are significant awards. They give them out every year. And that one, like you said, only twice. One of my regrets, I was invited by Dan to attend that and did not go. And,
you and me both, buddy.
Yeah.
I really regret I couldn't go, maybe for the same reason you couldn't go, Tommy, because of a schedule conflict. I mean, and it was something I could not get out of. And I know you probably still have the invite. I do have mine. And boy, what a nice invitation. Oh, I mean, again, you know what? Everything that Dan and Tommy, you know as well as I do, his wife Evie was a huge part of this also. They were a real pairing. I mean, no great guy achieves as much as you do like Dan without having support of somebody like that. And he did. And I mean, everything they did, they turned out is first class, and the family is that way. Like when Justin went to work on that bottle opener, which was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of his Grand Prix win, that is just as classy as things can be. Yeah. I mean, it was done because that's the right way to do it.
The right way to do it. Tommy, listen, I'm really glad that you joined on today. I know it's a busy week. We'll shift it up a gear a little bit. Now, anyone that was a fan, everyone I know is a fan of Tommy Kendall's. There are a lot of pieces of Tommy Kendall Trans Am bodywork probably on walls around the world. And there's a piece above your head. Is this your office or is this your little man cave?
This is my little man cave. The office is right off the front of this. I've got some oddball pieces. My beloved El Gallo chicken car. This piece here is a front end off the 90 championship Beretta. This is the first time it's been on the wall I put it up about a month ago. I've had this since 1990. Dan Binks, the whole crew, Tom Ebersol, Durbin, all those guys. It's all the under tray or the front underwing is all signed by all of them, and it's never been hung. And so that's there. This is another funny piece. This is this flamed Marlin.
It looks like Paul Tracy painted it.
Well, the funny story there is Barry Weiss, who's become famous of late as the kooky guy on Storage Wars. Barry is an old friend of mine I've known for 30 years. And this was, I think, this was in the late 80s. He says, hey, I'm going, he calls me Tomcat. He's like, hey, Tomcat, I'm going down to Anaheim to look at this flamed Marlin. And so I go down there, and it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. The scallops are actually jalapenos. They're peppers.
My goodness.
And we get there, and it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm like, oh, Barry's going to buy this. And Barry's like, no, red won't work in my house. Red won't work. He's like got this crazy, really particular good taste. And so I bought this flamed Marlin on a, kind of like a Storage Wars expedition to one of these oddball things.
How
so anyways,
funny.
I've got my collection, and then those are the nice things. I'm showing you the one nice-ish corner. The rest is just stacked to the rafters with crapola that I'm hoping to get sorted and up on walls a little more. That's the beloved Mrs. over there from
how perfect. We love her. Well, listen, just before we let you go, obviously the fan base that we have for the show is mainly sports car IMSA fans. I'm so glad I'm going to be hearing you in my ear all next weekend. I know that. You're probably going to be in the studio having fine dining, sushi and espressos while I'm in the pit lane. I wouldn't actually change that job, by the way. I love being where I am. But we are in for something special next weekend, aren't we? I mean, actually, the last conversation I had with Dan was about how amazing IMSA's going and how incredible the Rolex is going to be. So it's going to live up to the hype, I believe.
Yeah. But I will add, that Toyota Eagle GTP still would smoke any of these cars so bad. I mean, that still holds the track record at Daytona, and they put in the bus stop, the kink in the back straight, so they can't even begin to try and go after it. But
it was fast.
That car was fast.
Yeah, and well, it was also done. Actually, that record he ran with a version of the bus stop. When they won, we finished second that year in my very first race for Jack Roush. So he kept me from getting my own Rolex watch, old Dan Gurney, and that unbelievable. It holds the track record there, and Laguna Seca, and Lime Rock. I guess actually Bourdais might have beat the Laguna Seca one, but it was one of those cars that is just the apex predator, and 20 years on, it still holds track records. So wow. I feel honored I got to race against it. But he's always looking forward, like you said. Well, and I think what we've got coming to Daytona, it's like it used to be with Formula One drivers, literally 2 of them in the field, world champions. Yeah. And, just the depth with now Penske, there's so many great storylines, and we're going to have 24 hours to chew on it. We still won't get enough time to say everything we want to say.
I know. Not with you and I there. Well, Tommy, listen, I'll see you. I'm not going to see you on the ground, though, right? You're going to come out in the middle of the week?
I'm going to be there Wednesday, Thursday before I go to Charlotte, yes.
I will see you at the Italian for dinner then.
All right.
Tommy Kendall, everyone. Thanks so much, Tommy.
Tommy, great to see you, buddy.
You too, Ed. And those photos and so forth, you got the perfect guy for this episode, Justin. Take care.
Oh, I know. It's like an encyclopedia here.
Thank you. I mean, it involves Dan, I tell you. I think it's true. We all would agree. We couldn't say enough about how much we love the guy.
Yeah. True story.
Take care, Tommy. See you later. Oh, wow. I mean, Tommy Kendall, basically, now he's moved into TV. We have the best time when we do the broadcasts.
Oh, yeah.
And
Tommy's great.
I think that's, for me, one of the most the fun parts, because when you have drivers that move on from being behind the wheel and you get the chance to talk about it, you pull on all your experience, you pull on all the people, but you also pull on the people that work with you. It's just like being a teammate behind the wheel.
He's got such a great sense of humor like you. I mean, it's great. You're talking about good time. This was from the 99th Indy 500. This was up in the Pagoda during the race. and Dan was sitting next to Al Unser Sr. And then, of course, you see Al Jr. off to the side and Linda Vaughn there talking to Al Jr.
Linda right there. That's fun.
And of course, Al never likes really being called Al Sr. because he really truly is Al Unser.
Yes.
And then this is Al Unser Jr. But that was during the race up in the pagoda, and they, you know, Dan and Bobby were close because Bobby drove for Dan.
Yeah.
Dan never really spent a lot of time with Al, but they, as you can see by the picture, were having the best time. And I was standing there and seeing this, and all of a sudden I got my camera, and it was one of those moments that even as a photographer, you get wrapped up into the moment and you're just going, God, this is just amazing. I mean, you know, here he is having this great time. And then I go, oh, Ed,
take the picture.
Time to shoot a picture here. You know, I mean,
there's a funny story here that Larry has brought up. One of the great things I remember about the exchange between Dan and Bobby was the ribbing Bobby gave Dan about the eagle he was driving, and then the hard time that Dan gave him when he crashed the car. It's one of those moments between two superstars sharing memories, two good friends racing together. And of course, that's the thing. Dan was a superstar driver that became a superstar team owner, car creator, which meant he had to hire top drivers. How was his relationship with
and a lot of them? I mean, I don't know if you remember, but James Hunt drove his Formula 5000 car.
I have no memory of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Vern Schuppen, of course, drove for him. I mean, they've got a wall down at All American Racers of all the guys that have driven Eagles, and then they've got a wall that show all the guys that drove for them. And it's just like, whoa. And, you know, couple things, right? A couple things about Dan Gurney that I don't know that a lot of people really know, and that is he was a motorcycle fanatic all of his life. And he also was an aviation fanatic all of his life. Wow. You know, he was riding motorcycles at a really high clip, you know, up until just a few years ago.
Is that when
medical reasons prevented it? Yeah.
So he built his own motorbike, the Alligator.
Yeah.
Which are they must be collector's jewels.
Yeah, he built 36 of them.
Okay.
Then that number was based on the number of his F1 car. It was number 36. Wow. And in a wild motorcycle in that you sit in the motorcycle. So when you give it the gas, you're not hanging on.
No.
You know, you're not hanging. Yeah. Motorcycle, when you give gas, you're hanging on and also giving it throttle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it's unconventional. And that motorcycle, the Alligator, went through so many iterations. It wasn't something that they whipped up one weekend and were building it the next month or so. That bike went through a lot of development. So
Ed, if you follow his Instagram, I suggest you do, because you can tell when he's bored and he's not needed in the business that morning, because he'll go and deep dive into his photography collection and bring up pictures. So it's always worth. And actually, that one of Dan you put up about a year ago.
Yeah, I did.
And it just, I remember going, oh, wow, I don't know the story behind it.
Oh, I love that photo.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, I've shot a lot of photos, but that photo, it shows his hands dirty, his hair's messed up. I didn't go through any PR person. I walked up to the individual, the driver, the celebrity, the legend, whatever you want to say, and I say, hey, can I shoot a picture? And it wasn't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Come back in half an hour.
No.
So show me some of these, because I love Dan's sons were very important in the business.
Very, very much. Yeah. And this is a picture with Alex, of course, who was an accomplished driver in his own right. And then Justin and Jimmy, 3 of Dan's sons. And of course, there's Bobby Unser here and Dan. And this was at the 99th Indy 500, which was Dan's last 500 that he attended. And as I remember, some of the boys had never been to the Indy 500.
Okay.
And it was, I got to spend a lot of time with them. And I knew at the time, I go, God, Ed, this is a really special thing.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was a special time. I mean, I've been to over 40 consecutive Indy 500s personally, but this and I've had some great times with Parnelli. I've had some great times with AJ. I've had some, but I know this was different in a lot of respects. And when Bobby and Dan and the history that Dan represented in Indianapolis, I mean, he literally, he wasn't the first to bring a rear engine car to Indianapolis historically, but he clearly was responsible for the rear engine revolution. And he was responsible for bringing the Wood brothers, here we go again, to Indianapolis to completely change the way that pit stops were done at Indianapolis. I mean, you go back to the 50s, and literally guys would almost be having a cigarette during the pit stop. Hey, he's coming in now. And this was before they realized that, you could actually win the race by limiting the time of the car was spending in the pits. And now we've seen it go the other way to where that's how you do win a race, is by pit stops. There's more passing in the pits than there is on the track now. So anyway, I mean, we couldn't begin in our homage, in our tribute to Dan, to go down all the things that he touched in very big ways or little ways. I mean, I think you'd have to say Dan was a pretty darn good salesperson. Okay. And then nobody ever talks about this. And because when he was able to sell Colin Chapman and sell Ford and create this partnership, they call that in a legal firm a rainmaker. Okay. He was a guy that put that together. And clearly for Ford, it was a tremendous thing. I mean, that was part of the total performance era. And then, ultimate leading to he and AJ. And, that period, boy, I tell you, I almost forgot about this. That period in 1967 that AJ won Indy, and then he went to Le Mans with Dan. Dan had driven Le Mans 10 times. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Foyt had never been there. So Dan definitely had some tutoring to, hey, this is how we want to run this race and all that. And they win Le Mans. Okay. A huge victory. And then Dan, after that, then goes and he wins the Belgian Grand Prix.
2 weeks later.
Yeah. In a car of his make. That snippet of history right there, I think, is arguably one of the most important snippets of history, for sure, in American racing history. You know what I mean? That's just, it's unbelievable. I mean, how do you ever replicate something like that again? Number one, because of the restrictions and the ruling bodies, and which has frustrated a lot in sport.
We live in different days.
It's frustrated a lot in sport. But, this is another picture I want to share. In that 99th Indy 500, and that would be 2015, I think is right. 4 of Dan's sons got to drive Eagles pre the race, as a parade lap, and which was really great. And I shot a picture of that, which I don't have with me today. And but they did a practice a few days before. And when they all got out of the car, they got into the golf cart with Dan, and he wanted to know how it went. And being as I was not a family member, I made sure I stepped off away because this is a very personal time. And you have to recognize that when you're around somebody like this, that they still do have their personal life. And so I stepped off back away because this was a time for a dad and his sons
to debrief and to soak it all in.
And they did, but I did snap a picture of them all in the cart. And one thing you could tell was Dan was very interested in their feedback.
Was he?
What was it like? What did you guys think about our cars? And then him giving his feedback, apparently, of, well, this was this or whatever. And yeah, you know, it was one of those moments you say, God, it would have been great to have a tape recorder. But as I put on my deal the other day about when we had that lunch about a month ago or so, you can't tape everything in life. There's some things that are just not meant to be taped. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you have to.
And you still choose. Some things that are just private and will always be private. And that was one of those moments for sure that they shared as a family, that only they know what they talked about. And that's their private possession, which is it's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. I know you said we talked about Dan getting his hands dirty, but Andrew, I'm going to bring up your message here. You had the pleasure of meeting Dan in 1974 at Watkins Glen. You were attempting to obtain your SCCA license when your car was overheating from a hole in the radiator. Dan Gurney was there testing the Jorgensen Steel Eagles and saw my dilemma. He asked me if I had a penny and brought over a torch and personally welded the penny over the hole. You finished your test and you passed. Not many people, I mean, probably a lot of people can say that, but that is a wonderful story. I mean, that was the beauty of racing. I mean, it still is now. It's definitely a sport fueled by passion and enthusiasm. But that shows that whatever level Dan was at, he still.
Unfortunately, hindsight being 2020. Should have taken those off the car immediately and put them on a piece of wood on the
you should have done. If you knew that now, Andrew, you should have done that. Before we go, show me any other pictures there that we should really share, because
here's a couple. These are I don't have the picture of I only have two of the boys in cars, but this is a picture of Justin Gurney in the 69 Eagle that was powered by a Gurney Westlake stock block. Dan finished second in 1969 in this car. This car.
There's the Gurney flap at the back.
No
wing on this. Sorry, no, but it's a little tail.
Just a little tail. It's pre-Gurney flap. And this was in the transition time of Indy cars going from the wing to the wing. From the rear engine cars. This was this sort of odd wedge era of Indy cars, door stops in effect. But this car was restored by Ray Evernham and is still owned by Ray. And that's who let Justin drive it that day. And he did a nice piece on his Americana TV show. This was Alex in the 1973 winter that Gordon Jodcock won the 73 Indy 500 in. And of course, this is based, the 73 car was the 72 Eagle with just some minor updates. Jimmy Gurney drove the 1968 winner, which was the one that Bobby Unser drove, that Dan finished second to, as I remember. And then Danny drove the Coors Silver Bullet car, which was a 81 Eagle derivative.
So they all got to drive a different car.
Yeah, right. And this car, actually, this 69 car that Dan finished second in, was one of his proud accomplishments, I guess is the best way to put it. He was very, very proud of finishing second at Indy in a stock block engine car. He loved that. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Dan would march to the beat of his own drummer. He was not a Me Too guy. He took a great amount of pride in trying new things, even when it might not work out. And clearly the history shows that it didn't always work out.
But that is the definition of a pioneer. Pioneers don't get it right every time, but they're not afraid to try. And that separates them.
Well, you know, the old saying, pioneers get slaughtered, settlers, flourish or whatever. There's a certain amount of truth to that. And I mean, if you look at, you use a number of analogies to show this, that in order to achieve great success, you have to sometimes achieve a lot of failure. And I mean, Abraham Lincoln, our president, had a tremendous amount of failure. There's one that's always used about Babe Ruth. He had the most strikeouts, I think, at the same time as having the most home runs. And but these are bold people. These are people that are not afraid of failure, and those are people that get things done. And I mean, I think Dan's life shows that.
Well, before we go, so yes, Julius, I think they are going to be doing something at IMSA during the pre-race. I'm sure during the race, pretty much the entire paddock will be.
Well, he won the first race, Daytona Continental.
Yeah.
It wasn't 24 hours at that time, but he won that first race. He was a Grand Marshal a few years back. Yeah. You remember he was in that Lotus that Arciero family owned, and stopped and literally coasted across the finish line, and because he knew he couldn't continue doing laps, but he had a big enough time lead, I guess was the deal.
Use the banking to roll down.
So I mean, look at you bring up darn near any subject, and somehow
you can link it back to.
Yeah, right. It's really amazing.
I know Marshall Pruitt, who was my guest last weekend. He has produced a wonderful sticker, decal. I'll try and get hold of some of those for and maybe we can do a giveaway on the show, because I know they won't be widely available. That's beautiful, Joseph. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill. That's a good way of saying it. So, obviously, thanks for doing this, Ed. If you just your favorite personal memory of just the two of you. What's that before we go? What would you, as you go to bed when you went to bed on Sunday night, what were you thinking?
Well, oh boy, and I mean, the tears, like they say. I mean, Pete Brock put pretty strong Instagram about how he felt and his tears, and I sympathize and I relate to that. I think one of the strongest memories I will keep with me about Dan is there was so much more to Dan Gurney than I think most people realize. He's one of the most well-read people. He was a voracious reader and had a great grasp of world history. And sometimes I got more out of that than I did the automotive. And not that I wasn't getting a lot out of the automotive, but more life type things. And I think, I mean, there's so many, it's hard to pick one, but I think that's a big deal for me. Is Dan was just an amazing, well-read, curious, full of life guy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I've always in my life tried to take something from everybody I've met, even the bad people. Yeah. I find out how not to be. Okay. and from Dan Gurney, I got a lot. Yeah. I got a lot. He gave me a lot. He didn't realize it maybe, but he gave me a lot. Gave me a lot.
That's a beautiful, beautiful memory. And, I wish maybe more of us should read more so we have more context of who we are in the world. Well, listen, thanks for Ed and his family for letting us come here. Thanks for watching. I know it's a busy time on a Thursday afternoon, and next week I'll be at the Rolex 24-hour of Daytona. Some of those superstars will be there. We'll all be carrying the logo of Dan Gurney on the race cars and on the helmets, and I'm sure it'll be a topic, but I just wanted to share some stories with someone that certainly knew his career and the man personally. So thanks a lot, Ed. Yeah. And
it's my honor to know Dan and the family, and my heart breaks for the family. It's a very, very tough time. Yeah. And I understand that. And, our best wishes go to the family for sure.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I will see you soon.